Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's session of the Great Marketing Turnaround.
We're going to just allow a few moments here to allow those who register to log on. I see we have quite a few registered and only a few are on so far. But in the meantime, just a couple housekeeping items. We are going to encourage you to use the chat a lot throughout this webinar. So if you have specific questions for Heidi during the webinar, please put them in the Q&A so that way we don't lose them with all the comments that are going to be happening in our chat room or in the chat box. Additionally, I'm going to put in here a couple of links that you should have gotten when you got your reminder about this webinar. But if you didn't, these links are for the activities that you will be doing throughout this webinar.
Yeah, this webinar is intended to be a hands-on session. So I applaud all of you for devoting this time to your business marketing. While we wait for others to join, if you haven't already, you can download the Marketing Mix Idea Starters. I recommend that document be printed. It's a PDF and it'll be a lot easier to work with that if you have it printed out so that you can mark it up with a pen or a pencil. There's also an Excel file, the cost benefit exercise that we'll be working with today as well. So participating in these activities, you'll get the most out of our time together. So if you don't have access to download those, just having a pen and a paper handy so that you can do some of those things visually by hand, but having the marketing idea starters printed out is recommended. How are we doing on participants logging in, Laura?
Looks like we only got about a third of those who had registered logged in, so maybe giving a few more moments for those to log on here.
Will do. We have a lot to cover, but I don't
They
want
are
to start too
slowly
soon.
coming in.
I know what it takes to get away from whatever you're doing and log into one of these. So let's give them a few moments.
Especially directly after lunch.
I know this isn't the most optimal time to be doing one of these. We've had a lot going on, so we needed to take the afternoon slot this time. So please bear with me and try and get involved. It'll keep all of us kind of on our feet and paying attention. Maybe while we're waiting, I can go ahead and talk to those who are new to SBDC. We usually like to give a brief overview of some of the services and resources available through the Small Business Development Centers. So we're part of a national and state network. Maricopa's SBDC is one of 10 different centers throughout Arizona. Our main offering is no fee counseling. Here in Maricopa County, we have about 17 counselors. And they're spread across the county. So even though right now we're meeting mainly virtually, once it's post-COVID, we try and spread ourselves around so that we have easy access for our clients. If you're not currently working with an SBDC counselor, later at the end of our session, I'll give you some links to request counseling, which can be done through our website. We also offer training like our topic today, a variety of training, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. And I'll talk about some resources that we have through the Small Business Development Center. We're able to provide all of these services because we're funded on the federal level by the SBA. We're also funded here locally by Maricopa Community Colleges, and we partner with the Arizona Commerce Authority. Our technical assistance covers a wide range of topic areas with a sampling shown here. I would say that right now during this challenging time, we are spending a lot of time assisting our clients as they navigate the COVID relief funding programs. So that's been a big focus, but we also do spend times identifying access to regular commercial lending, doing financial reviews, marketing assessments, planning. We have resources and experts on buying and selling a business, manufacturing, technology commercialization, import export, and government contracting. We also have a variety of resources that we make available to our clients, and these are just a sampling of them. I will say that today I might mention some of the growth wheel tools. There's decision sheets that really hone into the marketing topics, and Life Plan is also another good tool if you're building your marketing plan. It's part of a full business planning platform, and some of the segments will allow you to take the stuff that we're doing in the Great Marketing Turnaround and develop it into a full working marketing plan. Profit Sense is a tool that will give SBDC clients access to financial benchmarking data. And we also get our market intelligence capabilities through a couple of arms, the SBDC Net and then IBIS World, which gives business industry reports. So I think just briefly before we get started, I would tell you a little bit about myself, and that's mostly that I've been doing this marketing turnaround thing for about 35 years in small businesses and in some corporate setting. I have a strong affinity towards entrepreneurship, as my grandfather was an entrepreneur, my dad was an entrepreneur. I've owned several businesses during my career, so I think it gives me some insights into the challenges of running a small business. I'm versed in a wide variety of tactics, mass media advertising, graphics and copywriting, digital marketing, PR, event marketing, direct marketing, and I've taught marketing at different levels. I think the thing I like to tell people most about my marketing direction is that I'm an advocate of customer centric marketing and informed decision making, which we'll talk about today. Also with us is Laura Serna, who is co-facilitating the webinar. She's handling your interactions, and Laura is a vital contributor to the SBDC, and Donna McCown, who is also helping us online, skilled marketing specialists themselves. Are we about ready to get going with our, I don't want to start the next step too soon because I want to have enough people on to start the assessment.
Yeah, it looks like those who entered into the webinar have slowed down now. So if we want to go ahead and start the next step, that would be fine.
Awesome. Because what I'd like to start with is to have you all take a 1 minute marketing management assessment. So that's one of the links that we asked you to access. And if you've already brought it up, you may notice it looks like this picture on the screen. So I'm just going to give you about a minute here. Laura will, oh, she already did post the link in chat. So you can click on that. Just try to be as honest as you can. Don't overthink it. Just answer yes or no based on what your usual practice is. And I'll give you a few seconds here for everybody to go ahead and complete that.
And once those are completed, Heidi, would you prefer them to just say done in the chat, or how about we have them raise their hand?
So one thing is, if you can keep your scores available for you for later in the session. So if you can just keep your stores open. And then do you want to do a hand raise? If you can see it's usually at the bottom of the screen, raise your hand when you have completed the assessment.
All right, we're starting to get some hand raises here. So it looks like people are starting to finish up, Heidi, just so you know.
Okay. So as you're finishing up, go ahead and check your score. From this, it's could be possible to see where your marketing planning practices could use a leg up. As we go through today's topics, you may gain some ideas to address some of the challenges that you're having. As the scores come in, There's no way to look at these individually, but there are, let's see, we have most of these scores are looking like a lot of people are aware of their target markets, but they might not have them written down. If your answer to number 2 or number 7 was off track, you might need to be looking at your time investment in your marketing. If you checked your quiz and number 3 and 5 were problematic, stay tuned because I'll have some tips on analyzing things like cost benefits of your marketing. And if you were having issues with number 6 or 9, then I want you to pay attention to when we start to talk about measurement. So we're going to be talking about planning as a means to end. So if you had a yes under number 10, so number 10 was the question about, I don't have a written strategy for attracting prospects. I just do as many possible approaches that my time and budget will allow. So number 10 is the try anything and everything approach. I'm hoping that today's session will give you some tools to narrow your approach for a little bit better cost effectiveness, a little bit more targeted efforts. So depending on your score, this is kind of, it's more or less this eye opener intent for you as we move forward. So last time when we met, or if you were part of the Great Marketing Turnaround sessions before, we covered some of these things. This is a sort of the secret formula. I just want to talk about it really briefly. Today's sessions are going to build on these ideas about the right audience for your right product service, which is your target market, which is questions 1 and 4 in the assessment. So that's important to deliver this right message at the right time. And building on those prior sessions, if you attended, or starting today, if you're new, you'll get some insights on how to best use your key messages and match them to your key market segments. So don't worry if you've missed the other past sessions, even though there's some key elements that are going to guide you. If you need those information and things to better understand, you also should know that we're going to be repeating the original sessions sometime in April. So you can always catch up on that. But today we'll put the implementation side together. So there's a lot of cover when it comes to selecting, deploying, managing, and refining your marketing mix. And sometimes we're just going to maybe scratch the surface, and in other areas we'll go into a little bit more depth. I've organized our topics today into what I call the 4 M's. So what we want to do is to really kind of set aside your time to focus on these. And this is what we call the marketing mix, and that's choosing methods to get the word out to your customers. I just come up with the 4 M's to help you remember them. So these aren't, magical or of any things. These are the various aspects of coordinating all of those things that tie into the marketing mix. So we're usually matching our message using some best practices, which I call mechanisms, to the right kind of media, and then for the most critical element, management. So you have a sustainable plan, and we're gonna even touch on measurement there. So worth mentioning, implementation starts with understanding your specific goals. So we covered this in the Great Marketing Turnaround session too. It really is your goals that should drive your promotional efforts. And that's the best way of really uplifting your entire marketing plan is by committing intentionally towards those goals. And we'll keep mentioning that throughout today's conversation. The topics we're going to cover or help you with any kind of business or marketing planning that you're doing will also just help you refine a plan, as if you've had a plan and you're just needing to be more responsive and operate in more agile ways. Um, this is kind of the session that's going to help you do that. The reason is that having the plan gives you the general target and the synergy that we'll talk about is needed, but being agile and nimble in the COVID arena is certainly important as well. So let's dig in. So um, when we're selecting the elements of a marketing mix, the message, of course, is going to be vitally important to the entire marketing mix. In session 2, we focused on really how to translate our product or our service features into benefits, and we won't rehash that, but the idea of using benefits to sell was a really important part of building that message. I won't be really getting granular on the message itself, but I am going to give you some tips in delivering that message. So I've lumped these tips into the 3 C's. I guess I like alliteration. Um, so we'll start with content, creative, and consistency. As far as content goes, there are some main recommendations. When you come out with a communication, you really want to stick to one idea per communication, and that's going to help really honing in and making it more easy to communicate. Remember, we talked about whatever the goal is of that particular communication. Also, another topic that we've repeated is to make sure that you have a specific target market segment in mind as you're communicating. We talked about selling the benefits rather than features. I call this sell the sizzle, not the steak. That's the way to remember it. But keeping your communications very benefits oriented. There's also the contact information. Now, I know this sounds really obvious, but I have seen more marketing errors in this particular area than I would like to share. This is the basics. This is how to reach you. This is making sure your website is on everything and clickable whenever you're in the digital arena, so that you have quick and easy ways for people to reach you. And then also the last content tip has to do with the AIDA model, AIDA. This is shorthand for outlining your message, beginning with what we call the end in mind. So we're designing our message along the stages that a buyer goes through when they're deciding whether to make a purchase. And this we did cover in our previous session, but I want to share sort of the graphic about what this AIDA model covers. These are the steps you take the audience through. It may be in one communication, and it's also through a series of communications. So I find it to be a good outline for any single communication that you're working with. The steps themselves could be shorter in some media and longer in others, but the model can still apply. Like on a billboard, you would have, since it's mostly visual, very few words, it'll be mostly about the upfront attention grabbing, maybe some interest, desire, and then a hook. The action could be a phone number or an arrow to turn at the next exit. So even on something as simple as a billboard, you can run through all of these steps. If you have an email or something a lot more longer, a blog, you can spell out the reasons for interest. You can have some offers to create the desire. There's a lot more that you can do if you have more space for copy and images to build up the desire and create some calls to action. So it is going to match the medium, but this formula can work across several different types of marketing methods that we're going to talk about. I do want to point out this idea of starting with the end, because we did spend some time on that. The end or the action may not be an actual purchase. It's whatever is the next logical step on their purchase journey, and it's the goal of the communication. It's the step you want them to take now, the next step. So before you write any word in your content, know what it is that you want them to do. Do you want them to share your social media posts to their friends? Do you want them to call you for a price quote? Do you want them to go to a specific landing page on your website? Knowing really the next step and what you want them to do is vital. And then really knowing what it is to create that right motivation or the desire and action. So I'll give you some hints on the call to action incentives in a few minutes when we get to mechanism. The second three is on creative development. So these are some hints on how to get good creative going. It's tricky because you might think something is really cool and your target market doesn't think it's not. So putting together good creative is not about the coolest or what you like the most as a business owner. It's about what's going to be the most effective, because I think rather than being award winning, you're all more interested in being action inspiring when it comes to your prospective customers. Not everybody is a designer or a copywriter. So I want to give you some things to consider as you create your next ad or even your next Facebook post. Um, Copy, in the sense that I have it written here, is text or spoken word. So it could be It could be something visual, but it also could be something spoken. For instance, it could be on a radio commercial or a video. The copy is the script or the spoken word. So it's applicable to both types of communication. So the first tip has to do with professionalism. And so, what do I mean by professionalism? This is kind of an eye of the beholder thing. So it's going to differ from industry to industry, audience to audience. Raw, bare bones creative is fine. It can be even a trend right now, but it has to come across of a certain quality that's going to make it worthy of somebody considering your company, your product. Professionalism matters in promotion. The reason, mostly it's because of competition. So, to put it bluntly, in this digital age, there's so much out there, and consumers are not as apt to accept brands whose communication techniques don't match their own sophistication or their own shopping methodology. They have too many other options. So I recommend that people really consider this idea of whether or not their content is professional at the level that their target market would appreciate. Consumers really place a value on their time, and they're only going to attend to something that they deem is worth it. So, professional copy and following that ADA will create something that's very concise and useful. So, relevancy is one of the things that you can look for when you're looking for whether something's professional. If it's concise, if it leads the reader to the intended conclusion, and if it's useful. Not everyone is great at writing. It's kind of like dancing. But if whether it's you or it's somebody else that's writing your copy, and I'll talk about outsourcing a little bit in terms of professionals. Really make sure that you are spending some time on having it be very clean and professional. It doesn't mean that you have to be really stuffy, even grammatically correct. The opposite, you really want to, and that actually gets into point number C, which is conversational. You really want to be catchy and conversational tone, matching your audience. The way to tell if something is conversational is to read it out loud. Conversational is the way people speak. So it's not going to be academically high standards. Um, but remember, it's still not okay to have errors because that goes back to professional. And for all of this, I will emphasize proofreading, another set of eyes. This is part of professionalism, but no matter how professional somebody is when they're writing, they will be making mistakes. So try and catch all your mistakes if you're the copywriter by having somebody else proofread it. Some other principles related to design. Design actually does follow principles. There's balance and space and proportion and color and texture and contrast. And all of these things come together to play a role into an unseen by the normal eye, a role in the user experience. Um, and it takes a lot of training, or some people have a magical inherent talent to understand, all of these boxes that you really need to check. If you don't have the skill, though, there's a lot of templates out there, and I'm sure many of you have used them in your marketing development, particularly if you do e-blasts and you use some of those tools. The templates are important because they simplify these rules of design, these principles of design, they're built in there. So I highly recommend, if you're not trained on those principles and you don't have access to someone who's trained, to make sure that you're choosing and sticking to some of those templates because they will guide you through those principles, which can't be relayed in a short webinar like this. The other thing about design is that it be purposeful. I alluded to this when I asked if you wanted award winning or action inspiring. You want your design to match the purpose, the goal that I talked about, and be surrounded by that action. So some purposeful design might include a really outstanding image that's dominant in the design, and their design is built around the first part of ADA, the attention grabbing ADA, and they're going for a lot of brand awareness, and that attention and awareness is the most vital part of their communication. Others might be trying to really get to that end in the ADA formula and have a click through or an action or a phone call, and they can't devote as much time and space and copy and design on just the awareness. So you have to tailor the design to the purpose of what that communication is for. The last thing about design is to always make sure your designs are on brand, and branding is not accidental. So visual branding is the strength of your business idea. It's your identity, and it's the result of using consistent styles and graphic standards. And this kind of leads us into the next C, which is consistency. So, this is one of the principles of influence that we discussed in the last Great Marketing Turnaround. It's part of my synergistic superpower duo, what I call consistency and repetition. So, consistency and repetition are two of the things that, if you take nothing away from this section of today's webinar, you want to write those down: consistency and repetition, because these superpowers will do the most to aid recognition and recall, which is one of the things that you'll want to do. They will also help contribute to trust building, which is a big thing in the buyer's journey. People are more likely to purchase from a company that they know and believe in. And without realizing it, when you're consistent with your brand, you're getting that familiar feeling, you're doing the trust building, and that's an advantage. But this also, consistency is going to help with engagement, because especially post purchase or after the buyer purchase with you, branding is really actually as much for retention as it is for business development, if not more. So we spoke about being on brand, and what that means is the same tone, manner, look, and feel, that you want to have a consistent style. So the tone of voice, the physical feel, the consistent style is in terms of the look and feel. Later, we're going to talk about consistency in terms of media frequency, but right now we're talking about that your message should be presented to the audience in a similar fashion, with similar unique selling proposition to give them the value you set out. You can still be creative in how you put that message out there, but the ideas need to stay the same, so that you're not confusing those who you're trying to reach. So you can do this if you start implementing tools to manage consistency and having a consistent style. If you outsource your creative, or you have a large company where many people develop a lot of external communications, then you are going to want to create something called graphic standards, or maybe you already have it. Could be known as a style guide or a brand book. It could even include things like preferred words or catchphrases, or how to use your slogan, how to keep your logo use consistent so that it's not distorted or made to look different. Um, there are some cases where these style guides and standards will include characters or spokespersons, and how they would be using, like Flow from Progressive, is becomes part of their graphic standards. So if you haven't spent a lot of time focusing in on brand, that you might want to think about working on this as a project or with your small business development center counselor. I mentioned Growth Wheel. They actually have a decision sheet that you can use to really kind of center around the decisions related to your brand. Um, I'm also available to co-counsel on these topics. Or if you're just a do-it-yourselfer, go ahead and Google consistency with brand style guides, and you'll probably come up with some good guidelines on how to develop your own style guide. The last item on here is digital asset management. So this is for growing companies. It might be important for you to employ a digital asset management tool. And that's something that keeps all your images and all your designs accessible to everybody that needs them. So it's like the single library or source of truth. Everything is one place, whether it's being used for in-house or for your outsource use. It's really important, because one of the problems with people using things erroneously in terms of branding is because they don't have access to the most current or the correct information. So there are tools out there, and I will share some tips about outsource coordination in a little bit. So a couple of disclaimers on the topic of consistency in messaging. Consistency doesn't mean being boring or redundant. Um, Overusing the same stuff can get stale with time. So we want to leverage our content, but if you have the same stock photo on every page in your website, that's going to be a problem. It stops working in the direction of that awareness and interest. You can still exercise a great deal of innovation and creativity within the boundaries of consistency. Um, but it comes back to knowing what you are and what you mean to your customers. So you want to make sure that you don't necessarily become boring or redundant. I recently experienced a retargeting campaign for a product that I was retargeted so many times it really got to be boring and redundant. So my excitement for that brand waned over the fact that they weren't innovative within their targeting. Um, Another caveat: if a certain type of content isn't generating the engagement you want, you need to rectify it. So even if you are striking out to post a certain consistency level, posting things over and over that are the same are not going to necessarily increase your engagement. If you're consistently wrong, then consistency isn't really the standard that you want to reach for. So, when I talk about strategically planning your marketing activities, the second M that I want to cover is mechanisms. And I'll be honest, this is just a catch all term. Mechanism stands for things that are about best practices related to the other M's. So, I just needed another M. So, message media management, these are some best practices relating to how to manage your media. And we'll start with incentivization. So, this is the process of making something, your product, your service, attractive by offering an incentive for the next step in the journey or for the purchase. It's related to the motivation of your audience. And even though it overlaps with message and media, it's important to talk about it separately. If you remember back to the AIDA formula, I said to start with the end in mind, and the end in mind is whatever action you want them take. And this mechanism is the way to get the action. It's the enticement. If it's done well, the incentive would be linked exactly to that next step on that purchase journey. So it could be different for every one of your marketing communications. I've often called this the offer because we think specifically about a purchase incentive. So many times it could be an offer. And last session, we talked a lot about different ideas for sales promotion being that short term tactic that incite somebody to take the next action. But incentivizing isn't always a giveaway or a sale or a discount. Incentivizing could be creating a sense of belonging to a group. It could be contributing to a cause. It could be some intangible incentive, but the thing is you want to know what the incentive is for the activity that you want them to do next. So if you're leaving incentives out of your planning, then you might be missing an opportunity for increasing the effectiveness of what you're doing in terms of your message and your media. I just listened to a couple days ago to the owners of a ghost kitchen on our SBDC restaurant series webinar, and they talked about incentivizing on the popular delivery apps where competition is really high, but the audience is super motivated. They're motivated to take action. So a good, strong incentive will go a long way in that type of media or in that situation. The next mechanism or best practice is automation. So this is going to come up again and again in our conversation today. With automation, you can make a lot of your daily marketing tasks really efficient, allowing you to save time, but also improving your marketing strategy. So Laura, do you have the poll ready? What I'd like to pause here and just ask all of you if there is any current automation software that you use, and if so, for what activity. So you can choose more than one here. These are a number of different types of automation, whether it's CRM as customer relation management software, or lead management software, email marketing, social media, digital ads. And it's not whether you do social media, it's whether you use an automation software for social media. So Hootsuite or Sprout. So look at those options and go ahead and check any of these that you use some tool that automates the practice that is described.
We do have about half of those in already, Heidi. So just so you know, we'll give a few more moments because there are quite a few to read through. And again, as Heidi said, make sure you select all of them that you're using. And then I see on here, Cara said that she loves to do active campaign in our chat box.
I got to pull up my chat again.
So if you do want to share
Cool.
kind of like what you do in the chat, make sure you're sending it to all the attendees because that's a great opportunity for your peers to learn from you as well and you guys to share ideas. So make sure when you're sending it, make sure you send it not only to us, the panelists, but also to the attendees as well.
Yes. So under that little caret arrow, you can send it to all panelists and attendees, and that's really important today because I wish this session could have been live, but when it's not, you don't get the advantages of other people that are sharing, and I think that's really important. So from time to time, we'll ask you to go ahead and put some of your responses in chat, and I think that's a really great way for others to kind of fill out and find out about different activities. So Laura, do we have enough in for some
Yeah, definitely. And I'll share
results?
those results with you now, Heidi. Are you able to see those results, Heidi?
I do. So they
Awesome.
should be up on my screen. It might be redundant for others if they're up on my screen. So this is really great. So almost 80% of you are using some type of automation tool for email marketing. In terms of the core automated functionalities that I recommend, the ones that are most affordable for small businesses, email marketing is at the top of the list. Outbound messaging management, like Constant Contact or MailChimp, you can get functionality on those platforms for as little as $15 a month. You can actually get free offers, but if you want to get to any kind of scale for your business, so that is really cool to see that so many of you are using that. Oh, I lost the results already, so I can't look at the rest of them.
See if I can reshare them.
Well,
But we
some
did
of
have a question in the chat about what is marketing workflow?
Okay, so marketing workflow could be something that manages the entire chain of how your marketing operations funnel works. So there's the leads come into the funnel and you work them all the way down to the sale. So different kind of workflow automation. And there's a lot of these that overlap. So as we talk about them, I'm going to tell you that there is not these categories that I picked isolate different functions, but there's a lot of overlap in this arena. When I tell businesses that ask, well, what should I be looking at? The top three that I think of in terms of automation, and this is because, again, affordability and the affordability comes from scalability, is the email that you guys have already put on there. Also, the CRM or lead nurturing, lead scoring databases, lead management databases. These are like your HubSpot or your Salesforce, or there's B2B has, I think, Pardot or Exact Target. I don't remember which one. All of these, and some of them are very industry specific, which is really awesome because then they will be tailored, more tailored to what you're doing. So those CRM or lead managements, the email marketing, and then the third is the social media management. So a lot of you, it looks like almost half of you are using social media automation like Sprout or Hootsuite. If you have some particular tools that you want to comment in which platforms work best for you, that way you can give some recommendations to your fellow marketers on this webinar and provide your feedback, because I can't spend a whole lot of time on this. I do know that a lot of tools, like HubSpot, have overlap on all of these aforementioned activities, but then you're looking into paying a couple $100s a month, and not everybody wants to commit that. But again, some of these core functions can be ganged together. Um, Even with some digital ad management, or if you have an e-commerce platform that integrates that core functionality. So another thought in this arena is that if there are some of these functions that are higher level and higher sophistication, this is where outsourcing does have some advantages, because a consultant might be paying the fees to use some of these products over many clients. So and especially if you want to get the know-how that goes with it and the opportunity to use one of these tools. Um, so that might be the way to go. So marketing workflow, again, to answer your question, Kara, is going to be one of those umbrella apps that could have several of these tools all within it. And it could have scheduling, prompts for doing certain activities, that kind of thing. So, if any active campaign is in there. So that's one of the shared methods. If any of you have any other feedback for the other participants, go ahead and give us some recommendations. I know sometimes discussing your tools with others seems weird, and then this isn't a Zoom webinar and doesn't allow for the one-on-one contact, but I encourage you guys to continue to use the chat as a dialogue tool. The third mechanism that I want to speak about is interrelation, and we're going to hit this over and over. This is the sort of the secret sauce of marketing that I call synergy. It's the way you connect one marketing activity to another. It's definitely a multiplier. Um, Old school marketers like me call the combination the marketing mix, which is what we're going to be talking about today. It's about using multiple tactics to push or pull the target market through this buyer's journey in a gazillion different ways. So we designed the campaign around this interrelation of the pieces. So it's building frequency and reach, which I'll talk about later, but we're also looking at the relationship between the media. So a person, hears an ad on the radio for a restaurant, and then that sensitizes them and they become aware and they see, oh, now there's a billboard with that same brand, and oh, there's a slogan, and I'm feeling hungry and thirsty, and then I turn off the freeway. So the interrelationship of those media is chosen for that timing, that proximity. Another thing, if we talk about online, but probably a better example is, how often you have thought, well, I should try yoga or cycling or something. And the first thing you do is you Google it. You Google yoga near me or fitness near me. And in that first stage, remember, they're in awareness. You're just finding out what's out there. So a customer who's in the yoga, or a business that's in the yoga business, might have a bunch of interrelated strategies so that they can attract this person to their website. This person that's just in the information gathering stage, they might have their um, Google My Business listing fully maxed out. They might have a blog that has an article that's going to have those search terms and keywords that the audience is seeking. So they would have another way from search engine optimization to attract them in. They could be doing some offsite advertising on social media too. But as that individual reaches the next stage of consideration, then they're going to really start to interrelate the media. Maybe they'll throw some Facebook ads to them, and they start to interrelate all this media, and it's building the credibility and it's building the number of impressions that they need. So when you're on target with your messaging and you're adding the interrelationship of the media over this series of exposures, you're getting more and more credibility. The more the person sees you, you become more realistically an option for them. So that kind of leads to repetition. You hear this concept over and over from me. Real estate's mantra is location, 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 and marketing is repetition, repetition, repetition. If you think about the whole concept of a campaign, it's a focused message that crosses over all the different media. There's this big value in focusing and repeating. And when we talk about the assessment I gave you and the idea of managing your marketing activities, um, we'll talk about how to keep that repetition going and leverage your messaging and get more out of it, but still be realistic about how much marketing you're doing. So it's the fine line in cost efficiency. So the question you ask probably often already is, what can be repeated? What can be given, redone, tweaked, and sent out? And a lot. But before I overlook this, if you're an online marketer, one of the mechanisms you must be using, because it has to do with automation, interrelation, and repetition, is hashtags. Tagging in general, making sure that your campaigns are connected through this kind of link, that type of joining in of automation, interrelation, and repetition. And also don't forget your internal marketing channels. So write this down, especially if you're a brick and mortar or a B2B marketer, you have to include your team in all of the updated marketing campaigns. Whether it's incentivizing your staff, maybe there's signage if you have a brick and mortar or other in-house promo. Um, This is a really important area that sometimes gets neglected in the excitement of reaching outward, but everything can start sort of under the roof. Um, Another really good place to start in terms of putting these mechanisms into play, and we'll talk about it again and again, is referral and trying to build referral as part of your process. And that's a great place to start in your marketing plan. If you're wondering, where do I do a turnaround? Let's look at referral and even retention. So those are some things to do when you're looking at these best practices. I guess it might be good to share an example that this was many years ago in another time of great economic uncertainty. I hope that's not dating me. I worked in a very successful referral campaign for a fitness business, and this business was sinking. Memberships were down, their new inquiries had pretty much dried up. They still had a core of loyal customers. So we decided to treat these loyal customers like royalty and literally create a campaign called Fit for a Friend as a play on Fit for a King. So we played up the theme of royalty, and the campaign had a heavy reward for our most loyal customers. So we gave them perks that were, easy to give, low cost, like free towel services, juice bar coupons, and all of that. But what we also did is incentivize them to tell their friends and bring their new friends in, so that they could be giving them gifts, meaning free passes. Then when they joined, they would get more perks, the newcomer, with fees. So there were tiers of incentivization for the referring loyal royalty, and also larger rewards too for the people coming on. It was almost entirely internal, because it was a referral campaign, but there were some e-blasts to the members that were designated to be something they could easily forward to their friend audience. So there was definitely automation, there was interrelation, there was even a direct mail at the end with a very short term offer. So the campaign culminated in a big royal event, and all of these particular mechanisms came into play. Interrelation, repetition was each of these particular events. The point was the fitness center added more members in 1 month than it did in the prior 6. And it was because they were putting in all of these practices, as well as focusing as what they were doing right, that loyal customer base at a time when new leads were hard to get. So don't forget that internal success that you have, your own staff, whether it's incentivizing them in a sales way, your own loyal customers, whether it's getting them to be repeat customers or to be referrers. Too much. So one caution when I talk about repetition, as I said, you need to be relevant and useful. Repetition can cross the line and be annoying. I think I mentioned a retargeting campaign that did that for me. It's really a fine line to be repetitive without seeming to be repetitive. If you always use the same creative over and over on your online campaign, that might become too much. I think it's great to put repeaters out there, especially in the offline world. Um, but you have to be really sensitive to whether or not your stuff is getting to be boring or annoying. Um, so those of you who are in the e-commerce business, it sometimes might seem hard to come up with the new stuff. And I would suggest that you think sort of out of the box and think offline, even though you live in an online world. I recommend doing what I call the people magnet exercise. And this goes back to Great Marketing Turnaround session 1 when we created our persona. So if you did create a persona for your target market segments, this would be a really easy exercise to do. The people magnet exercise is to think of that persona or that market segment, and then think of 10 physical locations that attract that target market or that persona. And when you have those, write them down and then just start methodically approaching them or thinking of creative ideas for a win-win cross promo. That way you're bringing the offline online and the online offline. And it could be another way that you're expanding, building that kind of repetition, building that credibility in a place where your voice wasn't really present. So we talked about message, we talked about our mechanisms, which is really just those sort of best practices. Now we're going to get into the nitty gritty. This is the third of our 4 M's. And this is really kind of the area that we're going to spend the most time on. This is sort of the big point of a marketing mix is where am I combining this? Now, when I talk about media, I really do mean all broad spectrum marketing activities. So all methods that allow you to deliver your message are wrapped into what I'm labeling as media. So these are some of the considerations that you're going to have when choosing your media. We're going to talk about whether the type makes sense for your business, the type of media. We'll talk about, is it a good match to the message, to the target market? Can it deliver the numbers that you need to be successful? And how do I measure, can I measure the return on investment? Is it affordable? And we're going to cover each of these in some detail. So let's start with types. The framework marketing fan is from the tool I mentioned called Growth Wheel, and it shows a list of 6 broad categories of marketing that you could be inspired by when selecting your marketing mix. You don't have to copy this down. I'll be doing some brainstorming on some ways to market in a minute. But also, I can also send you the article where this comes from Growth Wheel. It's a really good article, so I will attach that to my follow-up list at the end of this. So one of the points that Growth Wheel makes is that there are many different marketing methods to choose from. And again, the starting point, remember, selecting the right one is to match it to the purpose, the goal that you have stated. So if your goal is to attract new customers, or whether it's to maintain existing customers, or maybe it is to strengthen the brand recognition. But knowing that purpose, it's easier to go through the options and utilize them in the best way. So before we do a short activity on identifying methods for your mix, let's take a look at some considerations about when you're selecting from this long and broad list. A great place to start with is what methods am I already doing? What methods have worked best for me? Let's just say in the past year, because it's been a crazy year. So what components of your current marketing mix have been the most effective for your company? And I'd like you to answer this one, contribute to sort of the dialogue and also the idea brainstorming with the rest of the attendees online. Can you think of at least one media or method? And particularly this is existing businesses, because if you're new, you may not have had a lot of track record, but maybe you have an idea to share. But if you're in business right now and you have been marketing over the past year, what has worked best for you in terms of media? What method or media has been effective? This is part of how we help each other through this process of planning.
And again, just a reminder as you share in the chat so that way our other attendees can see, make sure that you're sending it to all panelists and attendees. So on your chat box, there'll be a little to button, and then just make sure you change that to all panelists and attendees. And I don't know if it would be helpful, Heidi, to maybe give some examples of what some might be using. We did get one in that says word of mouth.
So some of the examples that I had up here. So if you want to take a look at this list right here, Chris talked about retargeting. Martin talked about emailers. Carl said word of mouth, and well, word of mouth is great, except for how do you control that, Carl? So I'm asking Carl, what inspired the word of the mouth? Because it's very difficult to put word of mouth as a tactic because you have very little control over it. So what part can you control in creating word of mouth? There's emailers. Has anybody ever done a direct mail campaign through the postal mail? Has anybody ever done any kind of print or TV or radio advertising? Relationship development is a great way to continue messaging. And you probably have some tactics aligned to that, Carl. Some have tried printed mail, but not effective. Good. So of those things, online marketing, webinars, social media, of those things, why do you think those methods were successful? What we're going to try and do is look at some reasons why those methods might have been successful and explore some ways that we can replicate the success maybe in some other area, other media in this changing market. And to do so, I want to kind of share a philosophy that's my own, and that is variety is the spice of life. And I didn't come up with that, but some people even argue its validity. But when it comes to media, it's important to consider that the concept of a marketing mix implies variety. So before we get into the criteria of choosing, let's look at what are you choosing between. So there's some choices that we're going to make. So the first one we're going to talk about is media types. There are different types, and um, as we go through them, we're going to talk about traditional media versus new media, dialogue versus monologue, and paid versus unpaid. And as we talk about these different types of media, it might help you to look at them in a new way. But keep in mind those opportunities that you already said are working for you and why they might be working for you. So traditional versus new. So traditional is what we think of as the mass media, the typical advertising and marketing methods that predate the internet. Traditional media is known for allowing businesses to get a really broad target audience. These are things like print, billboards, television, radio, and it could be the old fashioned door to door cold calling, though that's probably not been as prominent today. It might be picking up the phone. But these are sort of what we would call traditional media. As media has begun to evolve, there's been a category called new media, sometimes referred to as emerging media. I think it's kind of misleading to call these methods emerging or new because very few of them are actually new. Um, but these marketing methods are really evolving, and I would say they were changing on a constant basis. So because of that, they're relatively new. The new methods rely on the internet, and they're um, allowing companies to really narrow their target audience through social media, through these paid online ads and retargeting, and through search engine optimization. One real kind of maybe obvious point, in general, customers have become less receptive to some of this traditional media because they have control over the ability to tune out things. So commercials can be skipped, radio stations can be changed, mail can be thrown away. So digital marketers are beginning to make a strong case that these marketing methods um, have less effectiveness. However, I will give you some ideas and options or things to consider before completely ignoring traditional media. Media use is very personal, and your marketing should be tied to the demographics, the geographics, the psychographics of your target market. So, this is true of both traditional media and new media. But if you're a brick and mortar establishment and you know your target market well, and let's say your persona is a male 65 living in the metro area, and let's say there's a good chance that you know that advertising on the local evening news might reach this because male 65 and older, 85% I think get their news through local TV. So it's important to really know your customer because there's no universal truth that says all new media is good and all traditional media is bad. Another important thing that I have to repeat over and over is that whole idea of synergy, because it's often the combination of methods that get the greater sum from the parts, meaning that maybe there's a small part for traditional media and a big part for new media in your mix, or vice versa. Um, Price wise, it's often said that traditional media tends to cost more than new media. And that's because of that broad targeting through those advertising channels. I'm going to talk about specific cost analysis in the webinar a little later on. But one thing I will say is don't just select a method because it's old or new. Evaluate it on the criteria that we're discussing. Is it make sense for your business? Does it match your target market? Is there believability and credibility? There's some credibility that comes from some of these traditional media that might not be there in the other side of it. And then we'll talk about, is it affordable, in a little bit. Um, so what I want to talk about next has to do with monologue versus dialogue. Before I have you do the poll, I want to talk about the concepts of monologue versus dialogue. It's what it sounds. Are you talking at your audience or are you talking with your audience? And I think already on the chat, maybe it was Carl mentioned about personal relationship development. So, in the area of monologue versus dialogue, there's a variety of different methods that could be considered more of a dialogue. And that means that if you're putting an ad out there that you're just simply pushing information, it's not allowing somebody, a print ad, to somebody to talk back. But social media or chats allow people to talk back. Customers could answer surveys or take quizzes. They can attend events either online or offline. There's contests, reviews. You could do personal selling that I've mentioned, webinars. There's such a thing as online calculators, and maybe some of the other things you've done that I haven't mentioned. So take a look at the list on the poll in front of you and think about in the last year, are there any of these methods that you've used that provide a dialogue with your customers? They can exchange information with you through the marketing medium. I'll give you a few minutes to answer before we go through that.
And this one is again a multiple choice poll, so select as many as you are currently doing.
Right, you don't have to pick one. So if you've got some of these things going as the interrelationship that I talked about.
All right, and I'm going to give a few more seconds here. I see we have a couple of latecomers here, and then I will go ahead and stop the poll, and I'm going to share those results again with you, Heidi.
Good. So social media, big one here. The next one is events with 57. Well, events tied with personal selling as well as webinars and others. Getting some additional stuff here in chat. So social media, you can definitely count that as a dialogue, but only if you're actually getting some response back. So you can't really count social media as a dialogue if you're just posting and no one is commenting, no one is sharing. A lot of social businesses or posts are highly monologue like. So think engagement. And if you aren't measuring this, start measuring insights like the shares and the comments rather than just likes, even, which is still interactive and engaging. So think about whether or not your social media, that 86% of you have it on there, is truly a dialogue, and what can you do to make it a dialogue. And then chats, obviously bots is something that's like a personified, it's not really a real response. So you want to make sure that you are using, if you're using a chat, that it's a real chat, and what type of response time is reasonable. So if you have a chat on your social media channels or on your website, make sure that you have figured out what a good response time is for your prospect to wait for a response, depending on the types of questions that come up for you in chat. So you want to be responsive if you're using a dialogue. A few of you have actually done customer surveys and quizzes, which is really important. So a lot of customer surveys and quizzes are important for getting feedback from customers to improve your product, but they actually serve a marketing purpose as well in terms of awareness building, and even depending on how you phrase your questions, advertising the very things that you're offering that somebody might not have known about until they took your survey. I also like quizzes or polls in social media as a prospecting tool. So think about if you're not using some of those dialogues, whether that could be helpful for you. I just took an online quiz that roped me into a discount on a session. So it can be a really great idea to use online quizzes as a prospecting tool. Events are also good, and safe live events starting to open up. Contests and sweepstakes. So not many people have used this. So I once created a contest for an orthopedic practice called the Happy Hippie. So this was for uh, people who had had hip replacement, and these patients were invited to share their stories about what they could do now that they were more mobile. And it was a little bit of an incentive. So they needed to send in their story. And then if they did, they got a Happy Hippie t shirt just for sharing. And then they got entered into to win a prize for a trip from all the entrants. So there was it was kind of like combining a testimonial with a contest. But a lot of people sent their stories in to us. We had months of vlog material. We do a prize winner. Just be careful when you explore the idea of contests or sweepstakes that there are laws regarding this. And so you do need to follow those laws if you're implementing them. But it is a great way to start to build dialogue and to use that mechanism of incentives combined to get some new activity. And then it gives you a lot of content and testimonials because that's another thing that is on the dialogue. So asking for the testimonial or for the online reviews. Again, you can incentivize this. You can ask for video testimonials. If you want to leverage any of these in places other than where they're posted, like if you take in testimonials on your own site, make sure you capture the legal permission to use these kind of submissions as you're collecting them. Personal selling is another viable marketing technique. It's equivalent to the online version of maybe the chats. And webinars, many of you are using that. If you aren't, think of using it for any kind of how-to idea. So whereas a video might be a monologue, a dialogue could be doing something that's a how-to type of webinar or training where you can get that participation and feedback. Doing something around your core business that is educational has a lot of marketing value. Nobody's using online calculators, and that would be very industry specific. But I know that in the banking industry, that's very big, and some other industries that can be helpful. Be creative. I don't see anybody adding a whole lot of dialogue ideas to the chat, but I love Chris's idea of delivering a cake one time with a note on it. He got the meeting. That's a very good um, idea of thinking out of the box. So as you're looking for this, remember dialogue is going to have value and look for the creative ways of doing a lot of two-way talking in your marketing mix, which dovetails with the next choice that you have. The next choice is paid versus unpaid. And in the interest of time, I'm going to really cover this very broadly. Paid media includes ads of all types, traditional, new media. Unpaid is kind of a catch-all for two things. What I show here as owned assets and earned promotional. So the owned assets, we think of these things as free because it's free to put something up on your blog, but the owned assets actually do have a cost to them. There's the hosting and there's the creation of them and then there's maintenance and then you have to pay for particular additional plugins and all of that kind of thing. So owned media is not necessarily free, but it is something that we can leverage cost effectively. Um, Also, unpaid is a catch-all for earned promo, which earned media could be those shares or reposts in social media. Again, social media may have some costs depending on whether you're subscribing to automation tools or having somebody handle your social media. There are costs. Another earned media that's offline could be public relations. So a lot of people say, oh, TV and print um, stories that get on, those are free. If we get on the evening news or we have a great article, how many of you would really frown if you had a great article in the Costco Connection, which is a magazine that Costco produces, which is on the top 5 of magazine circulation in the US, along with AARP. So if you had some free stories in one of those publications, you wouldn't frown upon it, but that free media, that earned media takes some effort to get there. So they might have a good place in your mix, some of these what we call unpaid media, but it's probably not free. So even your blog, the cost of the site, the time and resources optimizing it, and maybe you had to pay somebody to write it. Owned media are great. And by the way, the Costco Connection is an owned media actually for Costco. But these categories are something that you really want to think about in your mix. Do I have a good mix of both owned or unpaid media and paid media? And when is it really free or what am I really paying? Because you might not pay Channel 9 to come and do a news story in terms of paying them in dollars, but you maybe took a lot of time to develop that solid media list and send out the press releases and make the pitch calls, and all of that has a cost to it. Um, if you are big on time and short on funds, then unpaid areas are definitely a focal point in your mix. Uh, they can certainly help you with the reach and frequency. We're going to talk about that later. But they are also, especially earned media, is a great way for credibility building, which is one of the big hurdles in marketing messaging. So, though I'm jumping around a bit here, but we're talking about the value of unpaid versus paid. And my number one unpaid technique is something that we already mentioned, which is um, email direct marketing. So, email direct marketing, I believe, belongs in nearly every business's marketing mix. So it's highly measurable, it's highly tweakable. It works with almost all of the mechanisms, best practices that I talked about. It works for a great number of messages in terms of employing the AIDA principle. Now, most of you said that you've already been using some type of automation or technology resources to make it more valuable, which is great because then you can really measure it. So you really need to start to look at that data that comes with the tools that are automating your e-blasts. So Mailchimp or Constant Contact or somewhere to give you some of the feedback. Now there still is a cost, obviously, because you might pay a designer for parts of it or a writer, and maybe the cost of your e-blast tool or your CRM tools. So there may be a cost, but this is a very effective, what I call unpaid method. So the point is, you still need to make an investment when you're using unpaid methods. And I just want you to recognize this because this is part of the arena where people tend to, on that early assessment, that they don't give enough time for marketing. And the first thing that drops off are these regularity of these unpaid and very lucrative categories of mechanisms. This is other creative think outside of the box. So the radio station giveaway, the donating items for charity in exchange for publicity, the financial advisor who sends relevant tips in a quarterly newsletter to a very curated segmented list, or the consultant that does educational seminars for free, maybe to local business groups. Any business that holds an event that also not just puts it on their social media, but goes the extra mile and adds it to all the local calendars, like things to do in Phoenix at arizonacentral.com. These are some of the extra step kind of things that you could be doing to get out there and unpaid. Be cautious as you go. Offers can sometimes be too good to be true. Um, there's the shadow side to some of this. You know, you have to have some expertise and time to handle some of these methods. And if you don't have the skill set or the know-how, you just forego these methods in favor of something that you know that you can really make work. Or maybe you consider how you were going to gain that expertise, because there's a lot of tools for that, being self-taught as well as outsourcing. So you've gotten the idea. The marketing mix is a mix. It's a mix of dialogue. There's some monologue. There's some paid and unpaid. There's some traditional, and there's some new emerging meanings. So let's see if we can go ahead and mix up some marketing. We're going to do the first exercise. It's a brainstorming exercise. So it starts with that handout that I asked you to download and print before the workshop. Looks like this, the marketing mix idea starters. So if you could go ahead and find that you hopefully printed out before the workshop, there is a link in the chat. If you didn't pull it out, you can pull this up. We're going to work with it. So it's best if you print it out, but if you don't have it handy, then go ahead and just get a piece of paper, because you can sort of do this on your own by writing down some of the activities. I'm actually going to have you go through this list in a number of different ways. So it's really kind of nice if you have it, looks like this. If you have it as a PDF, you're not going to be able to work hands-on with it. You can work on a piece of paper. but we need to grab a pen or pencil or some fun highlighters or something to go ahead and go through this. So you're probably already scanning the list, which is good. I'm going to ask you to do some markup with this list. So first thing I want you to do, and I'll give you a little time on each of these steps, but I do want you to kind of go through the list and circle on the list any methods that you have ever used for your business. So circle all of the methods on this list that you have used for your business. Anything that you've used gets a circle. And I'm going to continue the instructions here for you, but don't worry if you don't keep up. You can continue to do this work on your own. It's just that we have a time constraint today. So I'm going to go through some of the next steps and then I'll leave them up there for a while so we can go through. If you've circled the methods that you've used for your business, now I want you to put a star of those you circled, add a star that you believe the ones that are most effective. So you may have circled 10 of them, but 3 of them you think deserve the star. So just add the star by those you believe have been the most effective out of those that you've circled. And maybe as you're going, because this might be helpful at the same time, if you really believe that some of those were just absolutely dogs, they were not effective at all, I want you to put a line through them, but still leave them visible so you can read them. But just cross out, put a line through those that you circled that were not effective, add a star. Those that were effective, maybe there's some that have neither a line or a star. You don't know. And as you go through this, I want you to notice if you saw any methods that you haven't used, but you might like to use, you might like to investigate. Go ahead and put a check mark next to any of those methods that you have not used, but you would like to investigate for your marketing mix. If you have ideas that are coming up that aren't on the list, capture those too. Write them down, maybe at the bottom of the page or on the back of the sheet. So by now you should have some items circled, maybe some stars and lines through those, and hopefully on this big long list, some check marks by some methods that you might want to investigate. If you're still with me, look at the stars and the check marks. And this is going to get tricky. We haven't really talked about the idea of co-op marketing except for slightly when I talked about e-commerce online offline. But I want you to think about if there's any of these methods that could happen out of cooperation with some other business. And I don't just mean as co-op advertising. Maybe there's an opportunity for a supplier to support you in terms of your marketing activities. So any of these activities that you might be able to use with some other business, draw a triangle around that star check mark to remind you that there's a opportunity for co-op advertising, partnering with another business, or being supported by one of your suppliers. So triangle around the stars and the check marks that could be, could be. Now it's a long list, and I wonder if anybody has any questions before we go on.
I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A box, Heidi. So again, if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A. That'll help us keep track of those questions for Heidi.
Okay, well then we're going to move on because this is going to be your idea starter page for how you're developing your marketing mix. So you want you to keep it in front of you for a while as we talk more about some considerations for media. I want you to be able to look back at your marks here. I want you to be able to make notes as we go on these vehicles, and then we'll come back to some tools that we'll use to continue to evaluate it. So our last considerations for designing our marketing mix are about the specific media, and I'm going to go really fast through this. So some of this we have already talked about in other great marketing turnaround sessions. We need to make sure that we're matching the media to our target market. That's the demographic, geographic, psychographic, and buyer behavior of our target market. If you can't demonstrate that the media reaches your target market, then obviously don't use it. It doesn't matter whether it's unpaid or paid, it's taking up your time. Running a random ad on Spotify without really knowing much about the audience. I mean, even if you can target a little bit on the age and gender, but if you didn't do some advanced targeting, there's some really granular tools that allow you to go by genre, and you want to be able to use some of these things if you've really defined your market segments. If you want to talk more about these topics, as far as targeting and online media, the SBDC and my colleague Chris Phil, Wednesdays has a delivering digitally a half-hour interactive conversation about these topics. So talking about really retargeting campaigns and trying to really select the right retargeting as you pick your media so that you're really on target with whatever those messages are. The second matching thing is to think about the purpose. Remember, we talked about your message having one goal, one idea, and you want to make sure that you're doing that consistently. But that media has to work for the purpose. And if you have a unique product or some educational hurdle, you need media that gives you more time to explain. I use this to point out that some people don't think about the difference in purpose for retaining a customer versus gaining a new customer. So, really think about your marketing and whether it's geared towards one or the other. What is the purpose of this particular marketing? The acquiring of a new customer is highly more expensive than retaining an existing customer. So, this is another opportunity for me to really stress retention as a motivation for your marketing. If your marketing plan doesn't have a designated goal of retention, then think about maybe looking more into that category because a new customer not only costs 5 times more, but if you were to increase your existing customer retention, they say just by 5%, your profitability could go up 25 to 90%. So thinking about customer retention as one of your purposes. And then the last thing that I've already hit a number of times is make sure that the message matches the media. Can you get from attention all the way to action, whatever that action was going to be with that media? So you want to be able to get all the way through that. Is there room for the message on the media? So I hope while I've been talking about this, that if you hadn't finished, that you'd had a little more time to work with that idea starters. Our next poll is really about what you have come up with on your idea starters list. So Laura's going to put up a poll, and what I want you to do is, again, you can choose more than one, but I want you to look at the sheet that you've worked with, and I want you to answer some poll questions, what you've observed from your markup on that idea starters list. So if you had a lot of methods circled, check that box. If you only had a few methods circled, check that box. If you had a lot crossed out, check that box. Maybe you had a lot with stars. Maybe you had a lot of check marks or things that you listed. And did you have any triangles? I'm going to give you a minute here to go ahead and look at that poll.
We do have a couple coming in. I'm wondering if this, as you said, Heidi, this was quite a lengthy activity. So we're going to give this poll a little bit longer than we did the previous ones. Heidi, could you remind us what the triangles indicated again? Oh, you're muted.
The triangles are those areas where you have a check mark or a star. These are media that you are thinking of doing or you're already doing that could have some value for cooperative marketing, partnering with other businesses, doing some co-op marketing or suppliers.
We'll give about 10 more seconds. Heidi, does that sound good to you? We have a few last minute ones coming in here. So we're going to be closing that poll here soon. Make sure you get your answers in. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end that and share it with you, Heidi.
Oh, yes. So a good many of you had a lot of marketing methods circled. So what this tells to me is that if you didn't have many methods circled, you might want to say, oh, am I really doing enough marketing? But if you have a lot of methods circled, but you didn't have a lot of stars, then it's really questioning the effectiveness. So consider what would happen if you had some of your methods crossed out. Do you really need to continue to invest in those? What would happen if you divested or stopped using them? Would it free up some resources to try some of the new media that you put check marks by? So if you're not having effectiveness in your activities, it might be time to better match your message and target markets. However, let's look again at some of those that you drew a line through. Some of the things you might have learned today, the matching and the mechanisms might improve some of those areas. 20% of you had some circled methods that were crossed out. What could you do to improve those particular areas? There might be good methods, but maybe there's some ways to improve upon them with some of the best practices, or maybe that's a topic to work with your SBDC counselor with. For those circled methods with the stars, again, I already told you this is a great way to build on your successes. Ask yourself what is making them effective. Is it the things that we've talked about, best practices that we've already talked about, or is it maybe something else? What is it? Take some time to examine those a little more closely. And those stars and the check marks, these are the ones that we're going to evaluate, implement, and improve. And we're going to get real quickly here. I want to get to some cost evaluation, but I want you to really think about these areas because this is the turnaround opportunity. It was with your stars, your check marks. Think about which of these are specific to retention because that's, remember, 5% can increase profits up to 25 to 95%. Plus, statistics show it's really easier to sell to an existing customer than it is to get a new customer. And those triangles, get creative. Reach out, look for more co-op partnerships. I challenge every one of you to start working on at least one co-op marketing partner idea this month. Keep the list around. Think about one co-op marketing effort that you could do this month. All right, we've covered a lot on media, but there's one area that we need to cover, and it's the numbers. This is the nitty-gritty of numbers and scheduling and choosing cost-effective methods. So we're going to go over some definitions, and then we'll go ahead and get started on how we can use that. The first definition is impressions. So impressions are when you're purchasing media, it's the number of exposures through that media or method. It's usually referenced for paid advertising. They sell often based on impressions. Impressions are actually a calculation of reach times frequency. Reach is the number of people that you touch with the message or the number of people that are exposed to your message. And then frequency is the average number of times that you touch each of those each of the reached population with your message. So impressions are important if you're trying to compare one media against another, because if you're trying to compare different and unlike media, it's helpful to have some basis to be able to compare an apple and an orange. And the impressions is one of the ways that you'll want to do it. It's also going to help us determine whether we can get to effective levels of advertising. Mostly, I hear businesses talk about calculating their spending based on just reach. So, how many people will this reach? And reach is very important, but you need more people for more businesses. And if you spend too little on frequency and put all your money into reach, you'll waste what you spend. So, analogy would be, consider the reach is the seeds and the frequency is the watering of the seeds. So if you have, for instance, a mailing and you have the choice, you can afford either one direct mail piece to 10,000 people or four direct mail pieces to 2,500 people. And let's say those are comparable price. If you think about it, when you send that one piece to 10,000 people, you planted the seed for 10,000 people and you have nothing left for watering. You can water that seed once. You don't have more frequency. They only got one frequency. The 2,500 people that you're going to hit four times planted the seed, watering it four times. So unless you have a lot of water rates and can get more water or more money, I tend to argue that you need to think about a lot more about frequency than you have. And that's because paying attention to something called threshold. Threshold of response is sort of the minimum level exposure of advertising that is needed to be done to achieve recognition. So this is a fancy graph, but really what it's saying is that threshold is a cumulative effect of advertising, and there's no magic formula, but this graph kind of harkens back to the what we call the golden age of advertising, when there was a rule of thumb that you had to have at least 7 times exposure before somebody would take action. Really, that actually varies too much on all the variables we've talked about. So it's not possible to say there's an exact number that you need to have somebody see your ad before they actually take action. But generally, people have accepted that it needs to be above 3. And maybe after 10, you get to where that guy was closing his ears and it might be annoying. So um, the idea is that there is a sweet spot in terms of threshold, and it's generally not 1. So you can do some primary research if you have the budget and have the time to see how your audience is responding, or start to use some of the metrics if you're doing a lot of online marketing to figure out what the threshold effect is for your marketing. But if you don't have the budget to do that, just think about these rules of thumbs and really think about what you're doing to elicit frequency in your marketing plan. So the next one has to do about with consistency. Remember that consistency was one of the first M's that we had as far as messaging, and so we wanted a consistent tone, brand, language, all of those messaging things. But credibility and influence are built through consistency in frequency and reach. And we'll talk about what some of that is. Not all impressions are going to be equal. So even though this formula holds true and there is a threshold, some type of marketing is going to give you a little bit better hold on the audience, and that will mean that you don't need as high a threshold. Remember, dialogue versus monologue. If you're engaged in a dialogue, you're a lot more likely to know more about what's going on and act on it, or remember it and recall it. So building credibility and influence does have an impact on recognition. It does lower the threshold. It does expand your marketing budget. And if you attended last session, I talked about principles of persuasion, and it also does something by providing social proof. It allows that authority building effect of marketing, the doing what the others people do. And if you don't believe me, then just ask Bernie, because repetition and building that power of authority. I'm trying to have a little bit of humor because it's afternoon and you guys need to be awake for this last part. So I can make a very good argument about staying consistent. And lastly, I want to talk about timing and the concentration of your media. So, consistency means you have to be visible on a regular basis, right? Just like Bernie, he's visible. But it doesn't mean that you have to be on all marketing channels all the time. There are three approaches to media concentration. There's the always on approach, which means you're running ads all the time, fixed schedule, there's a long duration, so you're consistently exposing and messaging. And this is actually, if you're doing paid advertising, very expensive. It's mostly used with brands that have a lot of competition and they have to stay in front of their audience all the time. But if you can add some unpaid to your paid, then maybe an always on possible approach gives you that consistency. The second approach I won't really talk too much about. This is really something that's used for a sales promotion, a short term burst of advertising. Sometimes it's seasonal, like holiday ads. It usually is going to just run and then be gone. And that's a time sensitive. It's not, flighting is not used often unless there's a strong indication for a purpose. The last one, pulsing, is a combination of the two, and it's one that I think I would like you to pay attention to. It's a way of concentrating your marketing spend so that the frequency and the volume are kind of condensed. A small budget can attempt to do this kind of pulsing and stay in the minds of the consumers and build up the impression that you're throwing out a lot of frequency in order to reach that threshold. So think about, maybe you don't even go yellow. Maybe you're actually red in some of these cases. So it could be a hybrid of flighting and pulsing. And you could see a benefit of really focusing. Maybe you're running 8 weeks on and 4 weeks off and sending your budget a little bit of a break, but allowing to water those seeds like you need to because you are able to put enough money into the concentration. The danger with spending always on is that you spread your budget too thin and you never quite reach the threshold levels of frequency. So these principles apply to paid versus unpaid media. So maybe your timing isn't constrained by money, but it's constrained by hours in the day to get up all this social media and do the e-blast marketing and to handle some of those earned media things. Think about the benefit of stacking and giving everything a big lag time to drop it all out at the same time rather than spreading it out over a longer period of time. So it's something that you already know but need to hear. It's important that the quantity of media doesn't outpace your ability to keep up with it with relative good content. So don't post on social media or add another channel or feel like you have to add another channel for the sake of having another channel. Because if you can't stay relevant on it, then I'd rather you stick to one social media channel and really use it well rather than having three channels that you use poorly. Do what you can handle successfully, and think about the concentration of your media because the rest is a waste. So there's a tool that we sent last time, this one here. This is a content planning spreadsheet. It's focused on unpaid media. I think there's one paid media in here as far as a print ad. Oh, direct mail too. This tool doesn't show impressions. It's just a map. It does show frequency so that you can use a tool like this. It was used, the purpose of this last time was to align the content and the messages along the media. But I want to show it because it helps you see frequency and how frequency adds up across different channels. There is a more sophisticated tool for media planning, which would include impressions like frequency and reach. And this is an example of that kind of tool. So it would include impressions, it would actually include the costs and some response and conversion. So this is actually, I want to talk about where we're going is figuring out the effectiveness or return on our investments. So this media planner shows a way that you can predict and then actually tell what your return on investment is from your marketing activities. This far right area, I'll zoom in here, has you projecting the response, the outcomes, and then you'll know the cost per impression and cost per response. So calculating these things and estimating these responses help you make decisions about which things to include in your media mix before you actually spend the money on it. It allows you to um, figure out which areas might give you the most bang for your buck. These are the same calculations that you would be doing after the fact, hopefully, to figure out whether you got that return on investment. Did the results actually measure up the way you wanted to? If you're measuring and tracking, then you'll be able to know the return on investment for your marketing expenditures. The best case is you track everything, you know it. The worst case, you track nothing, you still wonder what's working or not working. And I think that that's one number 10 on our assessment was wondering what's working. The middle of the road is you start tracking wherever you can, and the easier of the marketing activities to track, you start to get some idea of how that benefits your planning and your agility as you tweak your marketing plan. All right, we're going to work on the other activity here in the last 20 minutes real quickly. For this activity, you need to use that spreadsheet that I asked you to download. It looks like the one on my screen. It's an Excel spreadsheet. And if you can't work on it right now, that's fine. I'm going to show you a couple of examples, and then it may be something that we do as homework. So this activity is a spreadsheet that is going to talk about calculating response from your marketing activities. Laura can put the link in chat. And if you don't have Excel, you can work it on paper, but you'll have to do the math calculations because the formulas won't be built in like they are here. So we're going to do this rather quickly. Bear with me. It's helpful for calculating a cost per response. So that's the main thing that I'm going to talk about. A cost per response is going to show up in one of the cells. But it also, if you have some additional data on your conversion and your profitability, it could also help you actually see the end profit from a marketing activity. So I'm going to go through an example, and then you'll be able to try this on your own. My example is that cleaning business decides to use or is using some Facebook ads to get traffic to their website. And you have to know what you're going to be measuring as the response. So you have to decide what qualifies as a response for this activity. And for the cleaning business, their response that they count is whether that somebody clicks through to their landing page on their website in the ad. So they have a really good offer there. So they have calculated that they're going to advertise on Facebook, and they get a 1% estimated response to their advertising. And based on the ad bid they put in, they are going to expect to get about 62,000, or let's say that they're doing it after the fact and they did get 62,000, but it can be a projection. Impressions, that's combined reach and frequency, but they have 62,000 impressions. And their bid was $500 for that ad. Oh wait, but they spent $250 on creative. So even though the ad cost $500, let's add in the cost they had to have somebody design it. So their total out of pocket was $750. The calculation now shows that cost per response. So they had 620 responses. Remember, their response is a click through to their landing page, and it cost them $1.21 per response. So that alone might allow you to look at several of the different media that you're on the fence about, or that you're had on your idea starter checkmark list, and start to put in some numbers to see what your cost per response would be. But let's take it a little bit further. Let's say that the cleaning company knows about their conversion rate, and they know anybody that gets to their landing pages, that they have at least 10% of them schedule an actual cleaning because they have a really good offer on that landing page. And because maybe they have the really good targeting on their customers in Facebook, so they have a good audience. So let's say they also know that every cleaning, even after that really good offer and all their labor, every cleaning they net $50 profit on each cleaning after the discount and labor. So that means that they're going to have 62 sales from these response to their landing page, and the profit from that activity is 3,100. So that's like 4 times what they originally spent, the 750. Do you think that's a good investment in the marketing activity? So this particular method does compare unit profitability. So think about not your total take, but your profitability. You could do the same thing with revenue, but remember, revenue has costs underneath it. So it may not be a good idea to compare those two numbers. Um, let's do another example because I want to show you a different scenario very quickly. Scenario two is a coffee shop and they have a great offer. They have an offer that says buy a large coffee, you get a free oatmeal. And they're going to send it out in a direct mail in one of those bundled Valpak coupon things to local zips. And they expect to get a pretty good response rate for because of the bundle and the direct mail, a higher than normal response for their great offer. And they're going to pay for a mailing that goes to 10,000 households. Again, they also paid $500 for the zones that they picked, but they also had to spend some money on the creative. And their cost comes to 214, a little more expensive. But they had 100% conversion because every redemption of the coupon was actually a sale. They had to buy a coffee to get the free oatmeal. So they got all of those who responded actually became an actual customer. They made $2 profit, and the only reason they got that much was because they had some help co-op marketing from a supplier who helped support them with this ad. So it kind of barely snuck in there as any profitability with the giveaway, but maybe the supplier gave them a bunch of oatmeal or something. So they had 350 customers and they only really ended up 700 profit, and it cost them $750. So is this a good investment in their marketing? Well, some of you could say, this is enough for me to decide it's too close. I don't want to risk it. But some others might say, well, yeah, because this lifetime value or the repeat value of those 350 customers, some of them who might have been new customers that I've never even had come into my store before. And I'm so sold that I can bring them back because of my great service and products. There's value in that. There's value also in some unmeasurable, non quantitative factors like they may tell a friend, or there's some credibility in referrals. So when you compare these numbers, don't just simply look at what you see there as the profit, look also at some of these other values. And that's really what the next slide is about. We're running out of time, so I'm going to have you do the activity yourself with the spreadsheet later on so that you can calculate. And what I'm going to ask you to do is remember to count or determine what you're counting as a response. The spreadsheet walks you through all of the things you need to enter. And then remember to consider these other factors as you go through the end of that spreadsheet. So the cost per response, the value of the response, that qualitative return, that's those intangible measures that aren't really necessarily the profit. There's one other thing. There are many other ways to look at evaluating marketing return. And I just want to mention them here that on a macro level, you might be a business that's wanting to start by looking at your total budget and to compare your total spend to the total revenue that you generate as a result of your marketing. And that's often called ROAS, or return on ad spend. So there's no real magic in that other than that there's sometimes benchmark ratios depending on your industry. Some ratios are like 4 to 1, $4 revenue to $1 ad spend. Others might go up as high as 10 to 1 in order to stay profitable, because it really depends on how much of a profit margin your business has. So a larger margin means that you can survive a low ROAS and vice versa. Small margins are indication that a business has to really have some low advertising costs to reach profitability. So what if you want to reduce your costs? And again, there are some ways to build frequency and reach on a budget. So let's go through them really quickly and then we'll open up to some questions. So planning, I've already said that the best ammunition to reducing costs and being cost effective is to have a plan and focus on your target market. We also mentioned the paid and the unpaid. So really thinking about the unpaid opportunities, even though I know that there's a cost and the cost of time matters, but thinking about those alternatives. I want to also encourage you right now specifically to not negate the idea of negotiating or trading or looking at traditional media deals. Traditional media space right now is kind of on the less expensive side than the past sometimes. Do the math like we just did, but there's some things called remnant advertising, which is when broadcast media hasn't sold stuff and it's the last minute. There's ad spaces that, if they're not able to sell it in a traditional media, but they're still putting out the publication, they want to put some ad space in there. You might be able to get some good deals. You would really be amazed about what's negotiable these days. So I don't want you to discount that idea. Sometimes an advertising company would rather have some ad at some cost than no ad. I've been encouraging the entire time for you to cross promote and consider co-op advertising. I've also mentioned that automation is a cost saver if you look for cost effective solutions like we mentioned earlier. Plus it helps you manage large amounts of data, which is a time saver, which is a cost saver. I also suggested you focus on retention because retention is less expensive to keep a customer coming back than to gain a new. And then the last one is measurement. So in terms of measurement, I want to talk really quickly. Let me go back to the reason that measurement is so important. And I can't end this webinar without really talking about measurement, even though we still have a few minutes left. Measurement is one of the ways that you're going to be able to refine and tweak everything that you're doing as you go forward in your marketing mix. If you've been measuring all your marketing activities, then you have some historical data and doing that spreadsheet is no problem. But if you haven't been measuring, that spreadsheet that asks you predict conversion and things like that is going to be a little bit harder. So I want, if you answered on the quiz or the assessment that you have an issue with measuring, I want you to do a few things. You want to go ahead and make sure that you're measuring your analytics, your website and your Google My Business analytics. You're looking at organic traffic, you've cultivated traffic through your SEO, but you're also looking at configuring your analytics so that you know which traffic sources result in a visitor completing a goal and where it's coming from. And I wish we could spend more time on this, but I already mentioned to you that there's another webinar that you can attend on the SBDC events page that might help you with a little bit more about measuring your online. Take a class, hire a consultant, watch a video. All of these ways are good ways to learn how to configure your Google Tag Manager or how to set campaign parameters. There's things called UTM tracking codes that you can put in there so that you know where the hits are coming from your advertising onto your website and then the behavior that's happening from there. Digital marketing is far easier to track than offline marketing. Some are really hard to track, and the best way that you can find out is by asking your customer. But I will say that you want to ask your customer in a really smart way. How did you hear about us is good, but giving them a checklist for specific options, that methods that you've got in play right now, will give you some much more precise feedback so that they can tell you whether a specific thing is working. If you do ask about if they heard you by search engine or on the web, ask them what keywords they use or what phrase they searched. That will give you some better feedback. So also the last thing about measurement is train your frontline staff. To be useful, you need to ask this of all customers, not just a few customers. So that's our final management and measurement tip. All right. Next steps. So review your messaging strategy. That's for those items of using ADA. Finish working with the idea starters list. This was a lot to take in a short time period. And some of those idea starters are a little bit out of the box on purpose to get you to think of, there's way more than the 100 that were there on that list, to get you to think outside the box, to get you to think about co-op, to get you to think about measuring and trying more marketing methods. Then the evaluation, that's the spreadsheet. We didn't have time to work on it, so go through and pick one of those check marks that you put on the idea starters and put it through the paces of the Excel spreadsheet to see if you can measure it. And if you don't know where to get some of those predictive results, talk to the ad sales reps, look at the media kits, search on Google for what typical return is for some of those methods so that you can give some estimates there. Finally, I guess this is me out of breath saying set aside time for marketing. If nothing else, just scheduling your marketing and putting the time in will improve, even if you don't do any of the other best practices. Just upping your head in the game, working with your team members on it, sticking to it, schedule your appointment with your counselors because that's going to make it get done. And then finally, creating a measurement plan, improving of how did you hear about us? That's the HDY. That's how do you hear about us? Improving upon that. Get your customers to tell you how you're doing and set up your online measurement tools so that they're working in your best interests. Any questions now? We're coming to the end. We've covered all of these different things here. Laura, do you want to give a few seconds here before we conclude?
Sure, I don't see any questions in the Q&A though. Let me kind of scroll through the chat, see if anything came up. I don't think so. Yeah, I don't see anything in the
Well, if
chat.
there are some questions, you can always go ahead and email us after the fact. I'm gonna put together an email with Laura and we'll send some things out, some additional resources that cover these topics. I think I talked about the growth wheel. I'll send you that article. And then if you have any questions, you can respond there. So it's never too late to adapt your marketing efforts. So I hope that this very quick presentation gave you some ideas that you can implement in your own space, in your own marketing mix. If you are not a current SBDC client, you can sign up to be an SBDC client to work with a counselor on some of these and other business needs. The way that it works is you submit your form online at the website that's here. We set up an initial counseling session, and then depending on your goals, you may meet with one or more counselors for regular guidance on topics of your choice. So it's all really kind of dictated around what your needs are. And that will help you track and do some of those metrics that we talked about. Upcoming webinars, I've mentioned the delivering digitally. This is the session that's coming up next week is optimizing Google. Oh, wait, that's what I was talking about. Great. We also have payroll. And if you're purchasing a business, there's some taxes for those of you who are in love with taxes. And there's also a webinar on SBIR. But I recommend you going to our events page because there's more events that are getting added on a constant basis. The Arizona Commerce Authority also has some good events on the marketing topics as well. And I really appreciate you bearing with me. I talked fast, covered a lot of material. I hope there was something in this that you will be able to take with you into your next steps of your marketing journey.
Yes, and I didn't see any other last minute questions that came up, Heidi, so that'll conclude our webinar for today. There will be an evaluation at the end of this webinar. As you leave it, it'll automatically pop up for you. If you could please answer those questions, that'll really help us better understand how we can improve these webinars to best support you during this time. And Heidi, thank you for your time and thank you for presenting all of this great information. And we hope to see you all in our future events.
Well, thank you, and thank everybody for attending and putting up with the fast pace and the airplanes. I don't know if you can hear them in my background.
We weren't able to hear the airplanes, but thank you all so much, and we have a great afternoon. Bye.
All right, see you all.